The Smooth Breakfast
All right.
News. The headlines, the stories, the news. In-depth analysis of national current affairs.
Studio,
Freshly
mics are up.
pressed.
Good morning, Lagos. You're tuned in and listening to Smooth Breakfast on Smooth 98.1. It's with Valentine.
And Folu.
And we've got a special freshly pressed analyst back in the studio with us. It's Rotus. How you doing?
Good morning. Oh, I'm fine. Good morning,
How
guys.
you
Good morning.
feeling?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. Lagos, sorry, it's been a while. It's been a while.
All right, but Lagos, you are also our analyst for this morning. So don't forget to join us in this conversation of today's national news stories. Now we will be tweeting the stories for you, so you can see exactly what we're running through this morning. But make sure you go over to our Twitter handle at Smooth981FM. At Smooth981FM, go over to our YouTube page where we are streaming live right now. That's at Smooth981FM Lagos. And of course, make sure you use the hashtag FreshlyPressed981 to share your comments on Twitter. Not forgetting to share your comments also on WhatsApp.
WhatsApp number 0809 444 981.
All right, we will keep putting out that information for you. We'll tweet the numbers again. But right now, let's start with our first story. It's from Thisday newspaper, and I think it's definitely one that a lot of people will be talking about this morning. CBN and others back the removal of the president's power on assets forfeiture. Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria and other stakeholders on Tuesday backed ongoing moves by the National Assembly to amend the Currency Conversion Freezing Orders Act 2004 to remove the power of the president on assets forfeiture and to transfer it to judges of the High Court. Now, the Senate resolved to debate allegations of constitutional and human rights violations as well by the federal government. But all of this, Rotus, it seems, was done, they say, to pave the way for growth of the economy, and saying that currently the powers of forfeiture are vested in the president, which invariably usurps the prerogative of the judiciary to adjudicate and give ruling. I mean, so thoughtful of the judiciary. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, as far as a democracy is supposed to work, you don't want to concentrate these powers with just one person. It's very, very reminiscent of the changes that they want to make to the petroleum industry bill, right?
Yes.
So of course they have to break that into pieces. We have the petroleum industry governance bill, but one of those the changes is that the president doesn't have the power, or isn't supposed to have the power to allocate oil blocks. Yeah. So that is supposed to now be moved to a commission that is supposed to make those decisions. So it's very, very similar to what's happening here, in that they want to make sure that this decision is with the courts, and they are the ones that are supposed to be able to make the decision as far as the asset forfeiture is concerned. There was a little bit of back and forth between the deputy CBN governor and the lawmakers as to alerting the CBN governor, sending a court order to him. They were saying that, well, the courts are supposed
They
to
wanted
do that.
to direct the courts to do that.
To do that, but the courts are like, well, no, we're the High Court. Why do we have to reach out or send the court order over to the CBN governor? It's just supposed to be a notification.
Okay, well, Rotus, a couple of things pop into my mind as I read this story, and I wonder if some of our listeners out there are curious about it as well. It seems an interesting time to be focusing on what they feel is a prerogative of the judiciary, which they hadn't really been addressing before. They also talk about the equality of the three arms of government, and talk about wanting to empower the judiciary, and yet or deepen to deepen the constitutional responsibility. They haven't even deepened the pockets of the judiciary compared to the pockets of the legislature and the executive. So how is the judiciary really supposed to carry on its work? And it's something that we've heard our judiciary complain about
for a long time. And also the judiciary doesn't have a very good reputation as to right now with the people, because we feel like in many cases that they're compromised. They do need a lot of support, financial support and so on. And yes, I mean, elections are drawing closer. Everyone seems to be sitting up now and making sure these things are passed. But that is very correct. The judiciary is, I mean, in my opinion, should be arguably the most powerful of the three, because of the issues that they make decisions on, such as asset forfeitures and so on. So they need to be, they definitely need to be empowered. The issue of compromise in Nigeria is one that keeps popping up. And if you can't feel, or if you don't feel that the people who are supposed to be making judgments in your order as far as fairness is concerned are being compromised, then you don't have any faith in the system.
All right.
So it's
Well,
something that should be looked at.
Again, this is something that is supposed to be happening. We'll see whether it's just a soundbite or whether it's going to take
If they
effect.
actually act on it, yeah.
Going forward.
Oh, real
Yes.
quick, sorry. There also the other bill, a bill for an act to establish factoring assignment act, which is supposed to promote availability of capital and credits for the economy. Yeah, we need that, please. Right?
Okay.
It's not just the Anchor Borrowers Program for agriculture. All of us need one single-digit rates.
So
please, yeah.
business involvement there. Thank
Yes,
you very
please.
much for
Thank
that,
you.
Rotus.
Yes,
Don't
yes.
forget, Lagos, you are our other analyst is also sending your messages. She's already like, Roro, good to have you on Freshly Pressed.
Hey, hello.
I'm sending the messages to 0809 444 0981. Up next, messages are definitely being sent to people who would consider hanky-panky in the National Assembly. Mace Theft. The reps approve Omo-Agege suspension for 180 days. The story is in from the Premium Times, so you can go and have a look at it, and I suggest that you do. But House of Representatives on Tuesday endorsed the recommendations of the Joint Ad Hoc Committee of the National Assembly, which recommended the immediate suspension of Ovie Omo-Agege, the Delta Central Senator, for 180 legislative days. Now, the Joint Committee was constituted to investigate the invasion of the Senate chamber on the 18th of April and the subsequent theft of the mace. They did go on to push for immediate prosecution of Mr. Omo-Agege, and interestingly asked for special compensation for 5 members of staff who did their best to retrieve the mace but were overpowered by the invading thugs.
Yeah. Okay. So well, first of all, I'm pleasantly surprised that they actually pursued this pretty quickly, because I wasn't sure if they're going to actually get this going it's so quickly. This was April, so just a couple months ago, and Ovie, of course, this is from my side of town, so he's embarrassing everybody from Delta State. Thank you for that. My brother's name is Ovie, by the way. But anyway, I think someone here that works here too is named
personal
Ovie too.
person.
Yes, a personal person. So all Ovie people are not feeling good right now, but I am especially happy to read that they're pushing for prosecution on charges of treasonable felony, assault, harm, conspiracy to steal, and so on. That is the serious part. Because what happened? So what if they suspend him for 6 months?
Well, here's the thing. You say for 6 months, but I do believe there had been issues about the length of time that you could suspend a senator for, because it leaves his district, of course, unrepresented in the National Assembly, and that is an issue. 180 days is a fairly long time for people to not have anyone putting forward their interests. And if you want to prosecute, some people would argue, go ahead with the prosecution, right? That can happen while he's still representing his people, because the question is not about his ability to represent his constituents. It's an issue of desecrating the house or theft or whatever criminal charges you want to bring.
Right. I actually thought you were going to give a sarcastic wink and say that some people
aren't. I tried.
Some people aren't even represented, even when their senators are sitting in there. Right. I thought you were going to go there, but no. But as far that is correct. So I guess that's a constitutional thing as far as the laws are concerned. But I'm happy that he's been prosecuted. For the 5 people who are supposed to get special compensation. I heard you guys talk about this months ago when it happened. What about the Cisco plight in danger when these happen? They should be these kind of things. The only people who should be acting in to protect the mace or other things should be security personnel.
Well, here's the question. I wonder how much that special compensation is going to equate to.
Exactly. Let's see. Freedom of Information Act. Let's know how much they're getting.
Indeed. Queenette Hogan, hi Queenette, has sent in a message saying to correct something. No one can direct the court to do anything. They prayed the court to direct the CBN governor. Queenette, but that was actually part of the debate in the House, was that they actually wanted to direct the court, and it was one of the members that said, "Listen, you cannot. They caught it. You cannot direct.
Doesn't work like that.
You can't suggest it's your best option." Does it? But thank you very much for that, Queenette. Appreciate hearing from you this morning. There's still more coming through. Up next, let's go back to the CBN. A lot of the CBN is in here. I feel like this was the universe knew that we had to be in today, Rotus. So court order mandatory for accessing BVN information. Some people might call this a victory, maybe for the consumer, for the end user. And the reason is that the Central Bank of Nigeria has announced that the provision of a valid court order is now one of the conditions that must be met by applicants who are seeking to access the bank verification number details of any banking customer. Now, they did put out circulars to deposit money banks, mobile money operators, payment solution providers, so on and so forth, basically saying that as well as getting the permission of the CBN, you would have to get the court as well. I mean, what are your thoughts on this, Rotus? How does this work out?
Okay, well, the thing is, when I read this, it's on the surface, it does sound like it makes sense from a perspective of security, identity theft, and so on, fraud. Yeah, you want to make sure that if anyone is asking for your BVN, that they get details. They get a court order, get permission from the CBN, but in practicality, theoretically, yes, it sounds good, but practically, if you think about every time you're asked to provide your BVN, it's only when you provide. Well, I mean, speaking for myself, when you're providing your KYC details, if you're applying, and using an app for mobile money or something like that. So we don't want a case where there's too much red tape preventing transactions from going through. If a bank on the other end is completing KYC details and they want to follow up on something, they have to now go contact the CBN and go get court orders. But from a perspective of security, because I remember there's a watch list they also mentioned there for fraudulent activities. Yes, I understand that does make sense. And just hope it doesn't delay things as far as processing and so on. Because again, if you think about it, the only time a BVN issue comes up with what's your number, what's your details, is when you, the end user, are filling out information and the financial institution on the other end that needs it is requesting it. So it's a one-on-one thing.
Well, here's the thought process, and I'd be interested to see, because this is now something that will be happening going forward. I wonder, and I don't think that it can apply retroactively. So of course, banks and money deposit operators and so on and so forth that already have customers' BVN details, I'm sure would still retain those and would still be able to transact based on the information that they have. That
they have. Again, we have the Vice President Osibanjo is in California. He's trying to push investments in technology right now. So one of the major drivers of tech and making things easier is supposed to be the mobile money operators.
Yes.
There's the whole financial inclusion goals for 2020 that they're trying to push. So, if you look at all this from a macro view, you want to make sure things are as easy as possible, for these transactions to go through, but safe. Exactly.
It's best because we are coming from abroad. I don't really know. I don't know you from before. So,
well, quick question. Let's clarify this point of concern for me. Yeah. I mean, so what does that mean for the ordinary man that steps into a banking hall and he's asked to provide his BVN?
Right. So you see, again, that's what I'm saying. That's a one-on-one. It's my BVN, and the bank is asking me to provide it, perhaps for security or something. So you're asking me, so I'm going to give it to you. I wouldn't expect that you now have to go and get a court order or get permission from it, because it's a one-on-one thing.
I'm sure it won't apply to registration points. I'm sure it will apply, afterwards to people who are now requesting this information.
If the interaction is not with the actual customer who has the BVN and you're trying to get it elsewhere, right? And they also mentioned law for law enforcement as well. So if maybe the EFCC is investigating something and they want to use the BVN to double check, that kind of thing. So perhaps that's where it would apply. But I don't think, again, I'm hoping that it won't involve a delaying one-on-one transaction.
Thank you very much for that. We've got a few messages.
Cruz here sent in this one. It said, is the 180-day suspension adequate? Wasn't it a major crime he committed? It is tantamount to taking a king's crown, in my opinion.
Okay, Cruz, see, that's how you should focus. You still spoke about the prosecution. There's criminal prosecution there as well.
About Game of Thrones. Anyway, so Yinka here says, I beg, when have they ever represented anyone there? So what's the fuss if Omo-Agege, i.e. Agege Pekin, goes on suspension?
See, that's what I thought you were going to say sarcastically.
But just because you think what's the difference, it doesn't mean that you should do things that are wrong fundamentally.
True.
Big T sent in this message saying the National Assembly invasion. You see why the nation is porous. Headsmen rampaging, armed robbers, rampant violence everywhere. If the parliament is not safe, then you don't expect to be. In more civilized climes, people should be in jail by now. Shameful, says Big T. Well, let's move on very quickly to our next story, the hijab controversy. Now, this one caused a lot of conversation when it first came through. Now, Amasa Firdaus and others are called to the bar. So the Nigerian Law School on Tuesday said 1,550 students were successful after the April 2018 bar final examinations. Talked about the success rate, but really it also called an additional 12 graduates to the bar from the previous examinations, one of which is Firdausa Amasa, a law graduate who had challenged the restriction on the use of hijab during the call to bar ceremonies. Now, if you remember, she actually just showed up to the ceremony in her hijab, hadn't sought permission beforehand, and then when the ruckus sort of grew, she then took the matter to court, which I think is fantastic. But your thoughts on this, Rotus?
Folu, do you remember this? I called into Lagos Talks. You and I kept going back.
I remember.
You and I kept going back. Folu handled that day very well, though. It was that was a heated day. I mean, the phone calls, Lagos Talks was on fire that day. This all's well that ends well. I'm glad that they allowed her to called her to the bar, and that the situation was resolved amicably, and going for, again, these things, it's the precedent that it sets, right? If this had,
Absolutely.
you know, there are going to be other Muslim lawyers that are going to be called to bar.
And there have been before.
right
and
before
there will
her,
be since,
you know. So
yeah.
exactly. So you want to make sure that this works out smoothly enough, and so it's fine. So you can wear your hijab, express your religious liberty, and so on. And you know, almost a 70% what was it now, success rate. That's pretty good. So we've got some more sharp lawyers to come on freshly pressed in the future. Yes,
That's right.
so it's
Right.
pretty good stuff for them.
Very interesting
Yeah.
stuff. We do have a few more messages. Let's see if I can take one or two. Then we move on to our next set of stories. Jacob from Ado says, please, I want to thank any. Okay, I think some roads have been done, so he's very grateful. Thank you. Shout out to the
okay.
government. We'll come back to that. Max from Lekki says, asset forfeiture. So does this mean that the presidency can just suspect anyone of corruption and seize their assets? If that's the case, bye-bye democracy.
Right.
That's what they're reviewing. But
Right,
yes, that
right.
had been the case previously. And we've got this from Oye saying, just as Rotus has said, you shouldn't put yourself in harm's way and then expect compensation. But then who would be footing the special compensation? It's you and I. He says, is it the government or the suspect who's being prosecuted? Moreover, acts of patriotism are being built in. If you put yourself in the line for those you stand for, you shouldn't be requesting for compensation.
Right,
And
right,
allow
right.
the security personnel to do their job.
Very interesting.
Actually, funny enough,
Yeah.
we're not in the West, but those guys that were injured can actually sue him. They can do a civil suit, you know, for damages and physical, injury,
harm, yeah.
physical harm. Yeah. So I mean, theoretically, I don't know if they'll pursue that. So the compensation, it's a good question from that message. Shouldn't be coming from, I hope, our taxpayers. Should be coming from OVA himself.
But I guess we'll see.
We'll see how it goes.
Punch newspaper is next. Court orders forfeiture of ex-governor Aliyu's houses, cars, and 57 million naira. So the Federal High Court in Mina, Niger State, has ordered the interim forfeiture of some assets belonging to the former governor of Niger State, Babangida Aliyu. Remember that he was dragged to court by the EFCC on charges of conspiracy and diversion of over 1 billion naira ecological funds. Among the properties that he's meant to forfeit are 2 duplex houses in Mina, a farmland with 12 chalets, and 4 resort buildings in Bergen, Mina, and a sum of 57 million naira. What are your thoughts, Phil?
Well, I mean, this kind of links to our very first story. I imagine if it was only the president who could order the forfeiture of this of these assets. So you can see how it's the court that made this decision. It's flowing along, as it's supposed to, following his arrest and so on and so forth and prosecution. So this is how it's supposed to work. Courts are supposed to be allowed to do this. This gentleman has a lot of assets. Valentine, he's got the chalet, the farmland.
He's living a soft life.
He's living a very soft life. This is the kind of things that we talk about when we talk about how these governors are living. But yeah, 57 million, you could do some really good work with treasury bills with that kind of money. But I would hope that these assets, what happens then? Are they auctioned? Are they, what happens for
In the
going
meantime,
forward?
they're held temporarily.
Right.
Answers
but
to the charges.
if you think about what happens with, again, I don't know, I keep going back to the West, mafia bosses whose cars are seized.
Yeah.
They auction them and they sell them off. This guy's got a lot of farmland. He's got a lot of assets there. But it's good. This is how it's supposed to work. Again, tying to the first story, the courts are supposed to be the ones that order this to make sure it happens, and the judicial process is being followed.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sticking with Punch for this next story, Ondo banks shots over deployment of policemen in Ado Ekiti. So there was a rally. The APC and PDP rally held in Ado Ekiti yesterday, Ekiti State, for the political rally ahead of 2019, especially ahead of the governorship elections that will happen in a few days. So all the banks in the 4 local government areas in the Akoko area of Ondo State did not open for operations yesterday, following an alleged withdrawal, they say, and redeployment of policemen who are guarding the banks. The bankers say they do not feel safe.
Right.
A lot of people trooping to the ATM machines, and very few were working. So the banking halls were closed. Because of recent robberies.
Exactly, and I was about to say that there's somebody who gave a testimonial towards about that happening in the past. Look, we complain about these things all the time, and this, if you think about the movement to get state police, a number of people are saying, well, yes, state police makes sense as far as running the states and making sure they're not there, but will they then be compromised by events such as this, where a governor can commandeer them for whatever events are going on? So there's no reason why people should be stranded and not allowed to carry out their financial transactions because there's no security, because the police have been moved off for a rally. These are the kind of things that annoy people and make our lives inconvenient. You know, government, if you think about it, is supposed to make our lives convenient and step out of the way for us to do what we're doing. When activities such as this impede upon people's ability to transact their lives, it's a problem.
Well, here's a question though: shouldn't the private facilities like banks, for instance, in this kind of areas, invest more in providing security really for their businesses?
They should, but then Valentine, this is now, if you remember that bill they were looking at for single digit. I was saying interest rates or providing capital to us. Yeah, one of the reasons why the cost of interest is so high in this country is because of the expenses that a lot of these banks have to. When you think about power, when you think about cost of funds, you think
they're
about
just incurring a lot of expenses. Their overheads are massive.
It's massive, which is why, going back to the technology thing, we want more non-bank institutions that don't have this asset baggage of having to run branches and so on. But then, back to your point, they should theoretically be able to provide these themselves. It's expensive and it feeds down to us again. So that's why the state tries to support them by providing security, but then the very same state now takes the security away when there's a rally. So yes, they should be providing it themselves, but then it now feeds into expenses.
Very quickly, we've got a few messages just to chip in before the next set of stories. We've got this in from Prince, who says there's nothing new on the CBN court order to get BVN details. He says it has always been the criteria before the CBN gives anyone access to BVN details since the beginning. And he says, as a compliance officer in a financial institution, I have access to this. Even on the NIBS platform, BVN details are available for the subscribers.
So you're saying he doesn't have to get the court order?
No, he's saying that that's always been in place. Is what he's saying.
Okay.
Interesting. That's not what the newspaper reported, but
yeah,
thank you for that.
Okay.
Ugoma Chidozie says, I'm very angered about this hijab issue because traditionalists will soon start wearing regalia to our law courts. I don't know why we have to be adhesive to regulations and law as a country, but we must mix religion in with everything as a nation. What has the hijab got to do with the law? Says Ugoma Chidozie. We also have Big T, who comes in to say your religion has nothing to do with your profession. The Nigerian bar is setting a dangerous precedent. Lawyers have a dress code just like doctors or policemen, etc. So what happens when a traditional religious believer decides to attend school for the live chicken and his black and red wrapper wearing a legal wig? Would he be called to the bar? We need to be careful about what we do. Interesting. We'll come back to this later.
Yeah,
Let's get to the rest of it. I know, I can feel Rotus itching.
Yeah, I know.
It's like I need to respond. Okay, let's carry on.
Vanguard newspaper comes in with this story. It reads, Third Mainland Bridge to be closed for repairs. All right, calm down. So it doesn't happen yet.
Oh, boy.
The Federal Controller of Works in Lagos, Mr. Adedamola Kuti, on Tuesday, that's yesterday, disclosed the plans are ongoing to shut down Third Mainland Bridge for repairs. And he says they're going to consult stakeholders, talking about the transport unions, truck owners, drivers unions, law enforcement agents, among others, today to deliberate on a possibility of shutting the Third Mainland Bridge on July 29th.
What's it going to do to people?
In Nigeria, I don't know if you're growing up here, stakeholders, it's a bridge. You need to fix it because commuters need to get to work and get back home. What is the union supposed to do? What are you deliberating? Just
talk to their people to avoid that route.
Redirect
traffic.
I don't know.
Because Rotus, let's think about it, right?
Yeah.
It is a major artery for Lagos in general,
Right.
and we know that if there's going to be a closure of the bridge, whether or not they have to do it, it is going to cause a lot of problems. Now, what Nigerians have done in the past is when repairs have had to happen, or even dignitaries have visited town, even with a little bit of advance notice, people have heavily criticized the government for not involving them more. So sometimes these stakeholder quote-unquote meetings are for your unionists, for people who ply the road regularly and whose business is going to be directly affected, and it is going to affect our lives. So don't you think it might be important for them to have these massive meetings from now? Let them be warning us from now.
Talking now.
Which I agree.
Okay.
It's just the key players that we're picking here. It's the bridge. And it's the people who are supposed to be in charge of the bridge that's supposed to say, look, we want to fix it and we want to close it down. Just use a plan. Say, look, in a month or in 3 weeks, and you just allow us advance notice and repeat that notice so everybody knows. When a marathon is happening here, we cordon the roads, as Folu just said. Macron came here, they shut down some of the roads when the president of France was here as well. So fine, it makes sense. consult the stakeholders, but it just sounds so, I don't know.
It's a majority.
Yeah, no problem. But I think this should be more straightforward and should be something that should be. What we all have sense. We all drive and we don't know. Tell us a date. We will accordingly reshift our lives.
Okay,
to
so
make sure
everyone,
you fix
just
it.
hear word. Third
You
Mainland
know?
Bridge might be closed from
Right.
the 29th of July. They are still debating, so we'll know official dates
Yeah.
later on.
Yeah.
So
It
people
just
can start
sounds-
preparing their if you are planning on traveling that day, you will
Right,
want to know.
right, exactly.
So
True,
please.
true.
Very quick messages. Pearl sends in a message. She says, I agree on the hijab ruling. It is setting a very dangerous precedent. But hey, Rotus.
Hi, Pearl. How are
Laran
you
the
doing?
Bisgan, we see you. While Tolu from Lagos says, banks have security, but only police can carry arms, remember? And Bolanhos says, shouldn't you, Valentine, as a taxpayer, invest more in your own security power and roads? Listen, he also says it's not the right time to shut the bridge with the trucks parked on alternative bridges and roads. Oh, Lord,
the
help
trucks.
us.
The
Where's our
trucks.
light rail? Lagos, where's our
Right,
light rail?
great question.
And Benga Kamu says, what alternatives is the federal government proposing to be used during the repairs of Third Mainland Bridge?
I guess
Great
let us
Questions.
know.
Stakeholders.
Right?
Stakeholders.
Stakeholders. Oh, boy.
So Guardian has this story, Guardian newspaper. Troops kill 15 Boko Haram terrorists in Borno. So troops of the 7th Brigade, Sector 3 of the Multinational Joint Task Force. The Joint Task Force brings together soldiers from Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, and Niger, all cooperating in this fight against insurgency. And they said they've actually recovered. They shot a lot of men. Some of the insurgents ran away with gunshot wounds, and they're still trying to put efforts together to recapture them. And they said they've recovered in the process AK-47 rifles, 5 of them, and anti-aircraft guns and light machine guns in the process.
It's a step in the right direction. We're getting help from our border countries on the border, our neighbors. They're helping us out. It's a joint effort. It's just another thing. It's the monitoring of the borders to make sure that they can beat these things down in advance. That's another thing they should be looking at. There's been talk of using drones to monitor cars that are smuggling rice into the country. So why not use drones to monitor these borders where these terrorists are sneaking in and out of the country? But still, it's good to hear this. We want more good news about these terrorists being taken down and more joint efforts between countries in the regional area that are taking care of each other as far as security is concerned. So,
Also touch on the other part where the erstwhile Nigerian leader Gowon advised the governor Simon Lalong to make sure or ensure the push for the criminals who committed offences in Plateau State, for instance,
yes,
to be charged in Plateau State and tried in Plateau State instead of them sent to the capital.
to the Abuja correctly. Again, this kind of feeds into the whole the independence of state thing, so it should actually be, I agree, they should actually be tried there and then, because then if you're trooping everybody from every state into Abuja, it's going to delay the judicial process as far as getting them prosecuted. So yes, I actually do agree with that. It's happening in Plateau.
All right. Thank you very much, Rotus. We're going to round up with a few of the messages. Since we've got a couple of minutes, we might even respond to some of these messages.
Hey.
Femi Omolu says, with regards to the banks having their own security, private security firms don't have licenses to carry arms, without which they will be ineffective to guard banks. The police have to be involved. While Nimot Muli says, what's the plan? Ikorodu road jam-packed with trucks or inner roads laced with potholes? Question. While Ade Vincent, also commenting on the bridge, says, I think that they need to do what needs to be done on Third Mainland Bridge, but what's the duty of the stakeholders? Will they remove the trucks on alternate routes? That would be interesting, actually. Can you imagine if they sort of insisted that happened? That would be good.
That would be very nice.
I'm telling you.
Yinka says, you increase toll fare. Next, you claim you called stakeholders as if I don't preload my e-tag. Am I not a stakeholder?
Right.
Then on the same bridge I apply in a state where I unknowingly pay my tax, you claim you have called stakeholder. Am I not a stakeholder?
So tired
When
of that
Macron
word.
came to Shrine, which stakeholder did they call? This governor will go down in history as the laziest one.
Yinka is not happy.
But Yinka, just to say, Macron really, the government just kind of piggybacked on top of what private individuals were doing. That was really nothing to do with the government.
Yeah.
He really just wanted to go to Shrine.
Right,
That's all.
right.
Just turned down for what? And we've got this in from Ima, who says, what's the big deal with the hijab? Religion is like an albatross on our neck.
Sorry.
And finally, just to round up, this is in from Tony Ayo from Ayobo. He says, I beg to disagree with Gowon on the state of persecution. Such high-profile cases are always taken to a secure place.
Okay.
On that note, we're done. Rotus, thank you very much for
Thank
coming in
you,
this morning.
thank
We
you. Thanks for
appreciate
having
you.
me. Thanks for having
Do
me.
remember to follow him and his interesting mind on Twitter at Rotanquart. For those of you who
We have sports inside of the locker room, and that's at 8:15. Good morning.
The headlines.